Welcome back. This is our third episode of the Real Recovery Show, and we're so excited that you can join us. Today's topic is going to be the next step in the conversation that we started last week when we talked about what addiction looks like and what a bottom looks like. And so the next question would be, if you decide that you do feel like you have a problem, what do you do now? Do you go to a detox facility, or do you try to dry out yourself? What are the signs that you need to look for in yourself as to whether or not you can do it? And what are the options? How do you get into a detox facility? What is the difference between a detox and a rehab? And what's available to you, especially if you're living here in Las Vegas? And so I'm going to start off by talking about what I went through. Now, I didn't go to a detox or a rehab. Honestly, my experience is not recommended. And really what was going on with me at the end was quite horrific. I had a lot of hallucination, and I was super, super sick. I was locked up in my house, a house that I was about to lose, and I was paranoid and scared, and I was trying to come off of what I was on, and which was a combination of things. And I mean, one time I called the police and a fire truck came, and I was standing outside shaking. I don't even know what I was wearing, and just staring at the look on this guy's face as he was staring at me, because I was trying to convince him to go back into my house to look for the person that I thought was in there, and there was nobody in there. Mm-hmm. And you could tell I was sick, and I was so scared. And when I tried to come off of it, I got even sicker, and my brain couldn't handle it. I went into shock. I started seeing everything in a shade of purple for a while, like the kind of purple that you see when you wear those funky spiritual glasses, with the different colors. And it was really hard. And I felt very alone, which at the end of addiction, oftentimes people do get to. They run out of people. They can't work their job. They can't function. They lose things. They lose their health. And I lost my sanity. It took a while, even in recovery, to not be afraid of walking outside. So my experience is not recommended. And it took me a while through just trying to be healthier and trying to get better. It took me a while before I was even fit for human consumption. I couldn't go to any kind of therapist, any kind of group, any kind of meeting, any kind of anything. And because I was so uncomfortable in my own skin. That's an extreme. That's not what everybody has to experience. But I would have really liked to have had the information that we're going to discuss today. In fact, right before, on the way over to this radio station, I got a text message from somebody who was telling me that they wished they had this information when their brother was still alive, because their brother died, and without him knowing how to help him. And so joining me here today is somebody I've introduced before, Tay Singer.
Hi. I just want to let you know a little bit about my detox experience. And I've said it before, I was 24 when I got sober, but I was so dependent on the drug and alcohol that I had to have a bottle next to my bed. So when I woke up at 2 a.m, I could take a sip and go right back to sleep. I couldn't function without the substance. So I had a really miserable detox. I was coming off of a lot of opiates and a lot of alcohol and a lot of things I have no idea of. And I had to, just do it on the bathroom floor with my cat. And it was miserable. Like, it really was miserable. And today I know a lot more things. Like, today I know about different methods that you could have used. And today there's a lot more medication assisted treatment, which there wasn't back then. It was really just methadone. And I didn't really know what that was at the time. And today there's a lot more programs, and it's a lot more acceptable. And so it's just it's really interesting to think about my experience. But I do feel like my experience is a lot of the reason why I never relapsed, because I know I don't have another detox in me. I know it would kill me. I know that I couldn't do that again. It was just way too brutal. And so, this is a really cool thing to talk about today, because we do have other options and a solution that we didn't have before. So,
yeah, I totally agree. I feel the same way. I feel like when people think about their last drunk or their last drug, they think about it and they think, God, I have to remember how bad it was. And it's true. We do have to remember how bad it was, so that we don't go back to it. But for me as well, I have actual physical conditions that I ended up having with my nervous system, with my brain, with my health, that it took years to rehabilitate to where I'm at now. I lost a lot of memory too. And God, it was just physically, I felt fried. And I don't think that I would make it back to any kind of semblance of recovery. Mm-hmm. I really truly know that I just would be so sick if I even was alive. So if I was to ever touch a drug again or drink again, it's because I'm obviously there's other things going on.
Yeah.
And it would be because in some way, shape, or form, I somehow got to a place where I don't care if I live. And I do care. Mm-hmm. I do care very much. I want to have the best life I could possibly have. And the fact that I didn't die, and the fact that I can feel like my life is on purpose now, that's the better drug. Right. And I'm just super happy about that. So, and also when our life is all about drugs and alcohol or partying or self-medicating in some way, shape, or form, we don't actually know the effect that it's having on our bodies. We don't know that we're building some sort of tolerance that's actually not healthy because of what the body has to do to compensate. Sometimes people don't get help until their liver is already failing.
Right.
Sometimes they don't get help until their brain is turning to mush. Sometimes they don't get help until they're so sick that they may not be able to come back. Mm-hmm. And there are people that are, and I think of people who have come to the meeting space, who have been to meetings there, who have been through even more help but who also have co-occurring disorders like PTSD. Mm-hmm. And they can't get sober again. It is heartbreaking. You talk to them when they first show up at your door, and they are somewhat lucid because that's the condition that we've set. We would love for you to come to a meeting, and we want to help you in any way, shape, or form. But once you pass the line again and are no longer coherent, we're going to ask you to leave again. And I know of one person particularly who people used to remember going to meetings with, and for a while he would start off the day going to a meeting and end up with an empty bottle outside the meeting space, laying on the flower bed where a cop has to come and remove him and tell him he needs to go and get some help. And so many people have tried to help him. And you see their soul, and you recognize them because they're just like you, they're just like me. And that also helps me to stay sober and clean, because I don't want what I had and I don't want what I see.
Right.
I want to keep doing everything I can to get as far away from the life I lived.
Right.
But keep in mind, the mind that's on drugs wants to keep doing what it thinks that it is that's good for it.
Right.
And it will lie to you. It will tell you that it's your friend. You will feel like it's your best friend, and it will tell you that you need it. And it's not just a mental thing. The body adapts to the things that we do, and will produce less of this or more of this to adapt to the consistent use of a drug or anything, cigarettes, caffeine even. Mm-hmm. But if somebody keeps turning to something, the brain adapts. That's why we build tolerance. That's why we can go and keep turning to this thing and now start to feel better, relief. But we get to a place, and thank God I could speak from experience on this, after having come off of cigarettes, which I started to try to come off of everything else, but the body doesn't need the things I was putting in. It was never needing the things I was putting into it. Mm-hmm. My mind thought I needed it, and I didn't have or really sincerely seek a better way at the time. So, now that you might be thinking, okay, maybe I have a problem, maybe I don't, maybe I could try just not drinking or using this drug for a while. Maybe I could go to a 12-step meeting, or maybe I could get a therapist and start working on some of this stuff, maybe go into some sort of group therapy. And you're thinking, okay, but what if I can't come off of this safely? Mm-hmm. What if when I try to do that, it's harder than I thought it was going to be? And I'm not saying that, because I don't know wherever you're at, right? But I'm not saying that automatically everyone who starts becoming dependent on alcohol or drugs is going to have a nasty experience coming off of it. Right. It really depends on how much you used it. It depends on your other things that are going on in your health. It depends on gender sometimes too. It depends on age. It depends on a lot of factors, and what it is, the substance too, on what kind of experience you're going to have. But oftentimes people will rationalize and justify with themselves why they don't want to come off of something, because they're afraid they're not going to feel well if they come off of it. And so they keep selling it to themselves that that's proof that they should keep doing the thing. And they don't have the moment where they see that maybe they could attack the real issue right there, that they want to come off of it. They want to not be dependent on it, but that they may need to know another way and to have help doing it. Mm-hmm. And so if you feel, because nobody could tell you, whether or not you need to go to a detox, although I can't tell you whether or not you need to go to a detox or to a rehab. It's one of those things you have to decide for yourself based on your own experience, whether or not you've stopped and you feel like it's uncomfortable, but you feel like you'll be okay. And then you can start going to meetings and start getting that kind of help. Or if you're not sure if you can come off of it safely, or you've already tried and it was no bueno. If that's what's happening, then you might need help in a more formal way with a detox, with a rehab. And where do you go? Mm-hmm. Who do you talk to do that? And so joining me here today as well is Tina Fowle from
Foundation for
Recovery, because I obviously just had that leave my head. And we're so excited to have her. And she's going to be sharing with us about her experience as well, and what they do over there, and talk about getting into a detox, finding a detox, etc. And so, Tina, would you like to share a little bit about your experience detoxing?
Sure. So I'm a person in long-term recovery, and what that means to me is I do not put anything in my body that affects my thinking. I have 2 sobrieties. My first one was 10 years ago. I was drinking a lot, married at the time, and my husband and I decided that I should go into a rehab. And of course, nothing in Vegas was good enough for me, so I wanted to go out to Newport Beach. It was a nice rehab. It was right off the beach. I had my own apartment. People would come in and check on me, and it was great because I had a workout. I had somebody who cooked for me.
Wow.
Everything was great. I was paying out of pocket because my insurance didn't cover it, right? So that was fine at the time. But I realized, looking back now, that when I was released from there, I didn't have any tools. I didn't take any tools with me. I didn't know what to do. When I got home, it was kind of go to a meeting. Well, what is a meeting? And I didn't know anything about that stuff. So, I got out of the rehab, came home, and I relapsed. So a few years later,
Vegas became good enough for you.
Yeah, Vegas became good enough. Exactly. Actually, no, I went to California, and I was going through a divorce, and I ended up in somebody told me, go to a 12-step meeting, and I did. And I just got it like that. It was amazing because I was ready, and I was willing to do whatever it took, right? So I get sober, and I get 5 years. And I have a special needs daughter. My youngest daughter's special needs, so she's in a wheelchair, and I was moving her from her wheelchair into a stander, she's 100 pounds, and I'm lifting her, right? And I'm used to lifting her, but my foot got caught in her wheelchair, fell back, did a lot of damage to my back, to my leg, to my hip. It ended up for a year, I was on pain pills. So there I went on, they gave me muscle relaxer, Xanax, and pain pills.
Wow.
And boy, that just threw me for a loop. I just found myself just so addicted to them. I had no clue because I have never taken any pills, done any drugs. So here I go for this big loop, and ended up relapsing. And I couldn't find treatment in California. Nobody would take me. My insurance was switching over. It was the end of the year. I was switching over to a new insurance. I had paid, and nobody would take me because I didn't have that card.
Wow.
So my oldest daughter lives out here, so I came back to Vegas, and I ended up in a treatment center. And I was medically detoxed. This time it was worse because I had never detoxed off of opiates and alcohol at the same time.
Right.
And that was a huge difference. So here I am in rehab, trying to figure that out in a facility, not in a apartment detoxing all pretty, looking cute, right?
Yeah.
I was
No
a hot mess. Yeah, no beach, exactly. So facility's quite different.
And that's proof, right? That it's not just where you go. It's whether or not you're ready.
Exactly.
Whether or not you're willing to take advice. There's plenty of people that go to detoxes and stay in rehabs who do it, but there's a part of them that has their foot out the door the entire time.
That's right.
And so it has to be that a person is ready, and sometimes it takes more than one try for that.
Yeah, for sure.
And so you do work for Foundation for Recovery. You wear a lot of hats, and you help people find a detox now, which is quite the interesting change to be on the other side of it. So how does somebody get into a detox? They contact the Foundation for Recovery, which can facilitate that process for them, help them find that, right? Tell me about that process.
So part of my job is I'm a peer support specialist. I'm certified through the state of Nevada. Somebody will call and say, hey, what is it that you guys do? And we are people who talk to them because we've been there. We've walked that process. So we're not therapists. We're not counselors. We're just people who walk that process. So a lot of times when they come in, they don't want to share their story with their counselor. They're already ashamed of where they've been, what happened to them. And so, once they walk in and we tell them we're peer support specialists, they go, what's that? And then we tell them, look, we walked in your shoes at some point in our life. And we share our story, just a little bit of our story. And you could just see, wow, it's somebody else like me. And their eyes just kind of, okay, now I could tell you my story. And they start sharing, how afraid they are and what is detox and what do I got to do next and what happens when I get out of detox. And we sit there and tell them, what's going to happen.
That's really cool.
Welcome, yeah.
And so a lot of times the thing that dictates, unfortunately, where they go is, like you said, insurance. And so there's different types of insurance, and insurances are plugged into different places. And because of that, it could be a little bit daunting where you can go. And so the Foundation for Recovery can help facilitate that as well. Tay, for a living, currently, writes medical necessity reviews. And so she deals with when insurances deny claims. And so she's very up to date on the different insurances and why somebody might get denied, etc.
Yeah, so there's different types of insurance. We know about the federal insurance and the state insurance like welfare and Medicare, Medicaid, those types of things. We also know about private and commercial insurances that you might get through your job or through the exchange or, those kinds of things. And insurances can dictate how many people they have support that they support. So a facility might not take your insurance.
Right. Yeah.
It might take a different insurance, or it might it might take your insurance, but it might not take that particular treatment. And so there's a lot of things that you have to know before going in there, or be prepared to know, what are my out-of-pocket expenses? What are my out-of-network benefits? What are, and there's a lot of things to know about with insurance. It's not just, I have insurance so I can go anywhere.
But if you are so sick because you need to get help as soon as possible, you're not going to be able to do all that. And you need somebody to be able to tell you what's available based on your insurance. And so what if you have private insurance, Tina?
So if they have private insurance, you're going to want to call the customer service number on the back, and you're going to have to talk to an operator to find out what places will accept that insurance, because not all detox centers accept that insurance.
Right.
So once you find out the detox center, then you got to decide. Some of them are out of state.
Yeah, but there's also most insurances now actually have a portal, and you can go online and you go into the portal and you can actually pick detox or whatever it may be, and it will show you what is available. But then the facility or the provider might only take a certain amount of people with that insurance.
Yeah.
So you have another hoop to jump through.
Exactly. And so what happens? Do you put them in touch with them and you check to see if they have enough beds, or do you have to ask them, hey, this person has this insurance? Do you take them? What do you do to help facilitate that process to help somebody know where to go and what's available to them?
So we'll call each facility and talk to them to see if they have a bed and to see if that person wants to go there. Because I can't make anybody go anywhere. So it's all up to that person, right? So, my hands are tied, and all I could do is I put the facility on speaker, and we talk to them together and kind of guide them through the process. This is an all women's facility. This is, men and women facility. Some people don't want to go to a men and women facility.
Right.
So there's
a distraction there.
Yeah, big one. Yeah. But there's so much, that you have to take in consideration for it.
Right. And what's cool is just like if somebody goes to a 12-step meeting and they meet somebody at a 12-step meeting who has done the steps, who has gotten sober through that whole process or clean off of drugs, and they say, oh, wow, I see you who have walked through what I want to do. Here, they're saying, I need somebody to talk to me about what to expect going into a detox. And that's so helpful because the mind is the biggest barrier. It's wanting to stay doing the thing that it thought was good for it. And it doesn't realize that if it could just have a shift in perception and have an open mind, it could have a door open to a whole new experience.
Yeah, walking through that fear. That's what it is.
That's what it is.
That whole fear will lock you up, and that's what happens to a lot of them.
Yeah, I have a friend that used to say that we tell ourselves scary stories and then we believe them, and that's all that's happening. When we have an open mind, another way appears, and it's amazing that we're able to see that we could find somebody else who's walked before us. When we're willing and we're ready, it just happens. People come into our lives, things occur to us, we see a TV show, we see an ad for something, we see the show, anything happens where we start getting to a place where we're like, okay, you know what? Maybe the bridge between where I'm at and where I need to be isn't so hard to cross. So it brings up a question though, can you skip the detox process and go straight to the rehab? I'd like to be on the beach and not go through all of the coming off ofs and adaptings and stuff like that.
So when I paid, I still had to go through this detox facility, and it wasn't pretty. And I was thinking, I want to go home. I just want to go home because detox is not fun.
Yeah,
it's not. And even though mine was alcohol, it wasn't fun. I didn't enjoy it, but I had medicine there to help me. But when I got to the treatment part of it, it was nice, you know? But
I think that's really helpful too, to keep that in mind, that, if the mind thinks that it's going to be in a certain state for a really long time and it thinks it's unbearable, it will balk at it. It won't want to do it. But if you could say, this is temporary, you're going to be coming off this medication, you're going to be going through what it is that you're going through. And on the other side of it could be a beach.
Right.
It could not be a beach, but no matter what though, when we shift and now we're having a whole new experience, we have people helping us, but we're no longer withdrawing, and the brain starts to balance out, the body starts to balance out. And if we keep doing the next right thing and we keep using these tools, there is a better feeling after.
Right. And there's a really cool thing with medical assisted treatment today where it's not just, methadone. Like there are other treatments. There, like when you're coming off of opiates, you can do Suboxone or Subutex or an opioid antagonist, not something that's also going to give you a dependence. There's Vivitrol now where you can take a shot. There's other ways of doing things where it's not going to be another thing to get off of. It's a titration and it's seen, and a doctor's helping you go through it, and it's just a different experience than.
So what happens if somebody goes though and they don't want to take any medication for anything?
Well, luckily, in the United States, we have we have a medical autonomy where we can decide if we're going to take something, and a lot of times it'll be like on medical records it'll say. Against medical advice, because they have to, look at what is the safest for the patient. Right. But there's so many options now that they could probably figure out what the best option is for that patient. And it doesn't have to be this cookie cutter, this is what you do when you get off of this situation. It could be, well, why don't you want to do that? These side effects? Well, what if we did this instead and start you here and try to, get you to where you're comfortable and where it's safe and where you're not having all these side effects. Because that's the biggest thing, especially when you're coming off of multiple things, you have all these side effects, and like you're shaking and you're throwing up and you're just sick and you're yellow, like your skin is yellow.
But isn't it
like,
funny how we end up so afraid of the effects of what we're going to be taking?
After taking so
right,
much
we just
junk, right?
literally treated our bodies like a garbage can, but now we're really picky.
But it's important to find out what the side effects are. It's important to ask questions, because you might have to wing off that medication later.
Well, and that's why titrations are, like medications that do titrations are so much more gentler. They really are,
right?
Because you have that built-in getting off of. You know, there's two different ways to do an opioid medical assisted treatment. There's the maintenance program, which is a methadone, and then there's the detox assistance, which is a Subutex. Right. And so knowing those kinds of things and like being an advocate for yourself. And if you don't know, like ask, like they have to give you the information. Like they can't just give you pills. And so being someone in long-term recovery, like I ask about everything a doctor ever prescribes me ever. And also try to go the natural path. That's what I do.
Yeah. And the more holistic route, which we're also going to be talking about later. But, but keeping in mind that we live in a different time now where people know what's addictive and not addictive. What's the kind of medication that would be super dependent or harder to come off of? And the goal at a detox is to get you to a place where you're not dependent upon anything. Unless you have in that moment a co-occurring illness that maybe you need certain psychiatric medication temporarily or for the long term for. That's the other thing about this is that it's so hard to diagnose somebody if there is any co-occurring illness, because so much is because of the use of alcohol and drugs. Like it's so interesting over the years being around different aspects of recovery, how many people would exhibit manic depressive or bipolar or super depressive disorder or anger issues, and then certain aspects of it start to stabilize as the person starts becoming more present, more comfortable in their own skin, after they're not running and taking stimulants and then depressants and then stimulants again and whatever. Like there's something that starts to happen that sometimes a condition comes out if it's not temporary or long term, but sometimes also we straighten out mentally and physically. And it's interesting because so many people, and I'm just going to say this and then get back to this, so many people go to a psychiatrist while they're in active addiction and just say their symptoms without necessarily why they're having those symptoms.
Right. Exactly.
And so they're going off of basically all that you're telling them, and next thing you know, you have more drugs, more stuff to be your own pharmacist.
And you're also dealing with some different kinds of interactions because you're not being completely honest about all the things you're doing. So now you have like some extra side effects because you're interacting with drugs that you probably should not be interacting with. Yeah.
And so to work with somebody now, to want to get help, to work with people who are professionals who actually, even if you don't believe it at the time, because you might be paranoid like I was back in the day, but they actually want your highest good. And so, so there are different levels of rehabs, different types of care that you can have. What are, Tay, the 5 different ones?
So there's 5 different levels of care. We have your inpatient facility, which is typically 28 days. It can be longer. And that is going to have group therapy and individual therapy and probably those titrations that we've been talking about. You'll have nurses, you'll have a doctor probably once a week. And so that's really like your highest level of care, unless you need like a residential term, like a long-term residential facility. And then there's then there's the residential treatment centers. Then you go into the PHP, which PHP is a step down from inpatient from the IP. PHP is the partial hospitalization program, and so you're still a lot of times in the facility on PHP, but you have a little bit more freedom. Like you might have weekend passes or different things like that, and you'll have a little bit less intensive therapies. You'll still have the group therapies and the individual therapies, but it'll be a little bit less intense. Then you have your IOP, which is your intensive outpatient therapy, and that's when you're at home or maybe in a sober living house. I mean, it's very much recommended to go to a sober living house after you've been inpatient. And that will be a certain amount of hours a week where you're doing different types of therapy, whether it's group and individual or just individual. Then you have your outpatient, which is even a lower level of care where it's less one-on-one time and, and group therapy, but you still have that support and you still have that facility that you might have been with for the last year and a half, Right. And so you have these people that have been in your corner and are really trying to get you to where you need to be so that you can be successful in recovery.
And so at Foundation for Recovery, do you handhold through the whole process, or do you just meet them and take them to the thing?
All the different processes, we do handhold. We hold their hand through the whole thing. So all they have to do is come in and see us. We'll sign them up with a peer coach, and then we will guide them through that whole process all the way through. I mean, we have people that have time, a year in sobriety, and, they still come in and see us. So it turns into a friendship afterwards,
That's beautiful. I love that. Because the thing that happens with addiction is the world gets really smaller, right? We end up feeling super alone.
Yeah.
And partly because we alienate ourselves, we borrowed too much money, we pissed off too many people, and we ran out of people. And I ran out of people. I mean, before I lost my house and almost my life, I ran out of people. And because I said the same story and I played the same victim tape and I used people. I used people and loved things rather than loved people and used things. And so that's beautiful. I love that. I love that hand holding. I love being able to have somebody who has walked through it before me and to be able to talk to them about the whole process, because it's scary when you don't know. And so I'm super happy to hear that. So now you're in it. And you said that you had gone to it twice. But what is it like inside it? Like for you, like when you were in it, like what is the experience in a nutshell of like what you went through?
So because I had recovery prior to, I was there for a reason. I was there because I needed to get into this program and start cleaning up my life again. There's people in there that are just there to take a break, from this abusive lifestyle. They just need a break for a little while, and then they're ready to go back out. So there's all different types of people from all different walks of life. And for me, it was focus time. It was for me, I had to make sure that I did this for myself. I didn't talk to any of my family. I just went through the whole process. Whatever they told me, I did. Focused on me. Looked around and seen what was out there, and learned about all the different facilities, the different types of 12-step programs, Foundation for Recovery. I had a peer coach.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
So I had a peer coach, and I still work with that peer coach.
Oh, lovely.
So awesome. It's a great relationship that I have there. So I walked through that whole process with somebody guiding me through it, and it's all up to that person. So if you want recovery, going into a rehab center is great. Some people just don't want it.
I think that's the whole thing. If we fight it, we're going to suffer so much more.
Right.
We're going to struggle, and we're not going to get everything that we could get out of the experience because we're not even there really listening, really wholeheartedly taking it seriously. Yeah. We have part of us still invested in the disease. Like, I'll check it out. I'll take a break. It's kind of interesting because it just occurred to me, this wasn't for coming off of alcohol or drugs, but before well, it's kind of interesting too. So when I was 17, I drank and I ate something that I'm allergic to because I was very self-destructive. But I ended up wanting to kill myself. I drank a lot that night. And then I ended up walking the suburban street in the middle of night in Dix Hills, Long Island, New York, where there's no cars and everybody's at home, but I'm going to kill myself by walking in the middle of the road. And because somebody found out that I wanted to kill myself, I ended up going into the psychiatric part of Huntington Hospital in Suffolk County, and I stayed there for 2 months. Mm-hmm. And my addiction had already been going, but it didn't hit the level that it ended up going after that. But I remember just feeling like I had a break from my crazy life. Mm-hmm. And they had a hard time diagnosing me because a lot of the things that brought me there wasn't stuff I was continuing in there, which is also interesting. Right? So now they couldn't tell me what was wrong with me, so they wanted to keep me, and I was very happy to be kept because I felt like I needed a vacation. And you have to realize that if you consider the psychiatric ward of a hospital a vacation, that maybe you might need some real help. But I always knew that there was stuff going on with me. I just didn't believe in help at the time. Which also shows that it's never, of course, the alcohol and the drugs. You go to a detox and a rehab to help you come off of the thing that you're doing to medicate the real issues, the stuff where you don't have the tools. And that's why concurrently in a rehab, you get to learn tools. Yeah. You get to learn these things. And if you're ready, you can start learning the things that you didn't have before that now give you a real chance to have an empowered life should you keep doing them and building upon it. So sometimes people think, well, I don't really want to come off of alcohol and drugs because my life's going to be so gray after. Like, I can't imagine, it's like as if alcohol and drugs are the only thing that's making the light go on in their life or anything. And it's not even doing that, but it seems like it. But what really happens is that we've been so checked out, so not present, so not in our own skin that we've been disconnected from our own intuition and from our own true self. And so we find, when we sincerely want help, a whole different life with new tools and people who are also more focused on solutions. And so will they stay sober after rehab? It depends. It depends on the same attitude they had when they went in. Yeah. Especially if you go into a detox or a rehab believing it's going to fix you and you don't have to do anything. Mm-hmm. Like, just make me well. Make it so.
They're
and if you do that,
fighting. Mm-hmm. They're fighting when that I know. And I'm like, if you know, then why are you here with me? Yeah. If you really know, then why are you here? Yeah. I'm here to help you. I'm here. You pick your recovery path. Yeah. You pick what you want to do. I'm just here to show you your options. I'm just here to guide you through this process. And a lot of them will complain, I don't like this place, I don't like that. But you know what I keep telling them? You're right. It's temporary. It is. That's all it is, because the road that you have ahead of you is so beautiful that you don't even see it right now because you know, I'm fighting it. And once they click over to that other side and they accept and they follow through with it, everything changes. Everything changes.
It truly is that idea of a life beyond my wildest dreams. Because I talk about, like, when I first when I first started getting clean and stuff, my wildest dream was turning 25. Like, I did not think that was going to happen, and so to live a life the way that I live a life today, like, if you would have told me the things then, I would have asked you what you were smoking, like, it just didn't seem possible to live a life where you're helping other people and on a radio show and your bills are paid, and it just didn't seem like a thing that could possibly happen. And so it really is that piece of being willing and doing the next right thing no matter what.
It's amazing what helps us after a while to keep going too is just seeing how far we've come, because we don't believe that we could have come that far. Like when I first started truly focusing on healing, I just wanted certain things that I thought maybe might be attainable, but I couldn't fathom all the other stuff. But you get spoiled. You start healing a little bit and you want a little more, and you get healing and you want a little bit more, and it gets to a point where you start turning around and you recognize, wow, like, that's crazy. I never thought I'd live this long. I never thought I would be this happy. I never thought I'd find love. I never thought I would heal this thing. I never thought I'd be comfortable in my own skin. I never thought I'd be truly helpful. I never thought these things would happen. And yet, when then we have another thing maybe come up to heal or a challenge to face, we can remind ourselves we can keep doing what we've been doing, and look how far we've already come. If we can go through that, then we can go through a lot. And I think that's one of the biggest, most beautiful things about being somebody who has been recovering from addiction and trauma, is that you start to get to a place where you're not as scared of things. Like I said in the first episode, I would not have had the courage to do this years ago. And this is just another stepping stone for me in being able to feel like I'm tapped in and doing what I feel is right for my path. And so at this point, we're going to take a break. So the opinions expressed here are strictly those of the people who gave them and do not represent any 12-step program or should replace your own intuition or professional medical advice. We're going to take a break now, and we'll see you in a little bit. Thank you.
I think we really need to talk about addiction and recovery, the realities of addiction, but also the reality of recovery. A lot of us deal with the shame and the guilt from our addiction, and then we have the stigma of the outside, people that are not in our circle that are looking at us.
People are afraid to ask for help. People are afraid to disclose that they've got a problem with addiction, and ultimately they suffer in silence.
Addiction is a mental illness, period. You want recovery to be the solution for addiction. Basically, we got to present recovery in action. You got to demonstrate and show that recovery is abundant, it works, it's worth getting. We got to make recovery fun.
So recovery is positive, it's a lifestyle. But if people don't see me getting better, they don't believe it happens.
A lot of people think, you put treatment in the middle, you put correction in the middle, and then the byproduct will be recovery, but that's not the case. You want recovery in the middle. This other stuff is not a solution. It's a gateway to recovery.
I had many attempts at recovery over 10 years, had been through multiple treatment centers, but what was different for me this time was not the level of treatment that I got. It was not the medical detox that I got. It was that when I finished treatment, I was able to plug into a peer community that supported me, that lifted me up. If it wasn't for peer supports for me, I probably wouldn't be alive. I wouldn't be here today.
And you're able to sit down one-on-one with somebody that's new to recovery and help them develop a recovery plan and then get to the other side of maybe some obstacles or barriers they would face in their recovery. It's also those connections to resources in the community. It may be just having somebody to talk to that has that same lived experience as you to be able to keep you motivated to stay in your recovery journey. The main thing that individual gives is hope, right? Because if I'm sitting across the table and I see somebody that has had the same experience as me, and I feel like I just can't do it, and I see them actually putting one foot in front of the other and staying in recovery, that's the most important.
Welcome back. You can watch us on Facebook, YouTube, and on Amazon Fire TV, or listen to us on the PHLV Radio app, or get our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and iHeart Radio. And if none of that makes sense to you, just go to themeetingspace.com and click on the Real Recovery Show, and all the episodes every week will be posted there, as well as the ability to watch us live every Friday at noon. Okay, so now that we're back from our break, we're joined with Hema Andaya, who is the executive director of Nestled Recovery Center, a 30-day, 10-bed detox and residential treatment facility. And they now offer IOP, which you should know what it is because we just talked about that. They are a holistic, trauma-informed, mindfulness-based addiction recovery treatment center. And it's super exciting to have that kind of option, because a lot of times when you think of a treatment center, you think of something that's just straight medicine, get in, get some tools, talk to people, and not really have a way to heal mind, body, and spirit and learn to get more comfortable in your own skin. And so obviously nobody's born an addict. So here to talk about what the stages are leading up to addiction is Hema.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. It's such an honor, truly.
I'm glad
Lisa.
you're here.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, as you said, well, I guess some people are born addicts. There are babies that are born addicted. But for the most part, most addicts end up using experimentally first, out of curiosity, usually in the teenage years. And then there's more of a habitual stage in which it starts to become more routine. So maybe one beer after work, still not necessarily problematic. And then there's, after habitual, it can lead, not always does, but sometimes it does, into abuse. And in this stage is when we start to see some of the negative consequences that you were referencing earlier. So relationship problems, coming into work late, or no calling dates, appointments, late cancels, financial problems, maybe even legal problems at this point. So we're still not at the addiction stage. We're still in the abuse stage. We start to classify addiction when the physical tissues of our body have actually become dependent on having this external substance because it's had it for all of these years, from curiosity to habitual use to substance abuse. It is now at the addicted stage, meaning that it requires more of that substance in order to get the exact same high. And if you take away that substance, the physical tissue literally starts to throw tantrums. And so those tantrums can come in the form of nausea, diarrhea, vomiting, insomnia, restlessness. I think you referenced the feeling of like your skin feeling on fire. That's exactly what can happen at this stage of addiction. So we have all of those negative consequences in all of those different realms, and we have dependence and withdrawals.
So how do you know when somebody needs to detox? How can you know whether or not they're at that stage where they really need medical help?
Yeah, and so we talked about the different levels of care earlier. And those correlate specifically with those stages of use too. So we're talking at somebody who is either at substance abuse and or addiction stage of use. And so how do you know that maybe you should get some professional help as opposed to detoxing at home? The number one thing I can say to look out for is if you already have pre-existing biomedical conditions that you're aware of, at least. Sometimes you don't know if you have conditions until you detox, and then those conditions start to appear. But if there's any underlying biomedical conditions, such as like even something like asthma, if you have a chronic case of asthma and you try to detox on your own, it could be deadly. But then you're also talking about diabetes, high blood pressure, any type of cardiovascular conditions, even autoimmune disorders. So biomedical conditions, as well as severe psychiatric conditions that have already been predetermined and diagnosed. Other signs that maybe you need some professional help in detoxing includes if there has been multiple attempts already to stay sober and it just continues to lead to relapse. That is definitely a sign for some help. The other factor I would say is someone who's very high on avoidance and denial could use 24/7 support because their own brain cannot be trusted and it's lying to them. And so having those reflections 24/7, to kind of talk them off of the ledge when they want to leave to go use, to relapse, or, whatever, having 24/7 support can help them just wait 1 hour. Just here, try this essential oil. Come breathe with me. Come stretch with me. Yeah. And the last factor that I can think of that would help someone decide whether they want to get professional help or do it on their own is legal involvement. It always helps your cases when you can show that you have done the work and that you're rehabilitating yourself.
Yeah, especially if the reason why you've just become aware that you've had a problem is because you now have a court order to do certain things, to go to meetings and to get your court card signed, or something big is happening in your life that's letting you know that you may have this problem. But I feel like we're always lying to ourselves. Our mind is always lying to us when it says that the alcohol or the drug is what we need, because how can it possibly be truly? Now, I understand, like, if somebody would have said this to me years ago, I wouldn't have had the capacity to really hear it, because I had diagnosed such severe PTSD that I really did believe that everything that I was doing was exactly what I needed to do. And I also grew up in a violent house, and I felt like the things that I was doing helped me to cope. And so I couldn't speak to if it at any point was true or not, but it was what I believed, and the mind is very powerful. If it believes something, it'll help it and be good for it. It's very powerful. But it took getting to a place, like we've shared on previous episodes, it took getting to a place of realizing that I need something else. I need something different, because I'm just circling the toilet bowl. I'm not actually getting anywhere. I'm just having the Groundhog Day effect, and my life is getting smaller. So for somebody who runs, and if you could share actually a little bit about, what your role is. I mean, you could say executive director, and nobody really knows what that is, right? Only you.
I don't know if I know what that is.
So, but what
it's ever changing.
What are your qualifications, and what is your role specifically, and how involved are you in the process?
Yeah, so I started with the Nestled, helped open it up 3 years ago, and started off as clinical director. And that role I understood very well because I'm a psychotherapist. My specialty is mindfulness and trauma, obviously. And so I was in private practice before coming to the Nestled. So as clinical director, it was very obvious that my job was to create the culture in regards to the program that we offer. And so this is where I came up with that treatment philosophy, the threefold holistic, and that we address all 8 dimensions of what it constitutes to be a healthy individual, according to SAMHSA. Trauma informed, so we try to get to the root cause of the psychiatric and the addiction disorders, and then mindfulness based, meaning helping the individuals learn to be comfortable in the uncomfortableness that is the now, and learn to ride out those waves. And now as executive director, I oversee all departments, not only the clinical programming. So I oversee medical and operations and clinical, and it's more so about holding the vision of where we are going as a company, and staying in and making sure that all the decisions that are made from the top down are in alignment and in integrity with that vision.
Beautiful. And so you mentioned medical protocols. So can you kind of give us a picture of what you do, the medicines that you give and how and what your focus is in that whole process on whether or not you're doing it for titration or for calming or for helping somebody to rehabilitate?
Absolutely. So there's different types of detox protocols that can be anywhere from mild to severe, anywhere from a 3-day taper to maybe 14 days, all depending again on those factors I mentioned earlier, how chronic the biomedical conditions are. And again, you can't tell what those conditions are sometimes until they're detoxing. So
Absolutely.
all of that it's very customized and individualized in that way. So the mild to severe protocols can be Ativan or Librium or Subutex or some of the medications that we use. So when you are getting professional detox, by law, you are being, vitals are being taken every 1 or 2 hours while awake. There's COWS or CWAS, different assessments that are being taken that assess cognitive function as well as withdrawals, appetite, sleep. And then all of those conditions, insomnia is something that happens pretty frequently.
Oh, yeah.
That's being treated in that 24/7 support that is detox. So this is why it's really helpful not to do it alone. Why, if there's help,
right? Right, and we live in a time now where it is much more public, much more. There's the stigma to it is still there. And the story about, you're cool or you're normal or you're respectable or you're lovable if you don't have a problem. And so we still have so much of that. Never let them see you sweat and fake it till you make it and pretend. And it's unfortunately, while it could help us when it's empowering to overcome fears and get past our own mental blocks, it could also be used to keep us stuck because we can be so isolated where we think that, nobody's going to understand me. They don't know. They haven't been through what I've been through. And if they had my life, like we said earlier on in a previous episode, they would use too. And so oftentimes, maybe we need to know we need to humanize the person that we're reaching out to and maybe hear what got them into wanting to help people so that we feel like we're not just another number. So what got you into this?
So I was raised in a family where addiction was rampant. Both my parents are deceased now, so I feel a little bit uncomfortable sometimes talking about them. But the truth is that up until they died, both of them were addicts. Alcohol, gambling, and possibly sex also, now that I'm learning more stories. And so, I grew up thinking all of what I was witnessing was normal and that going without food for 3 days, and just scrambling to put something together, not knowing if the lights were going to be on or off, not knowing who's at the door. So my sister, who was 3 years older than me, we had a little secret knock that would mean it's me, it's safe. And just growing up in what addiction ends up doing is, lower socioeconomic status type of situation and rough areas. And so growing up in that, I think it was probably the grace of God, one, but two, I got really good grades in school always, just was blessed with a really good brain, thank God. And I got a lot of attention there from my teachers. Right. I became teacher's pet and always knew the answer and always wanted to help. And so I got these needs met emotionally, which I think prevented me from actually going into addiction. But I could have very easily been on that road. And I actually was on that road, when I was 12, I already started experimenting with different substances and hanging out with crowds that gave me attention that were not necessarily the best.
Isn't that true that we want attention so much that in and of itself is a drug? and we'll do what other people do, and we'll hang out with other people, because when you grow up in a dysfunctional home, you are invisible. And everybody ends up playing some sort of role to get their little hit of, wow, you see me.
Yeah.
And so were you the oldest, or did you have siblings?
So both my parents came from different marriages before. So they had, like, my dad had a set of 4 kids and my mom a set of 3. And so I am the oldest from both of them getting together, and then I have a little sister.
And were you living with your older siblings, or were they?
The one sibling, the one that was 3 years older than me. Yeah, she's an engineer now. An amazing human being.
Interesting. Yeah. So, and what's interesting is that a lot of times, because when you grow up in dysfunction and alcoholism or addiction, if you don't end up doing ultimately what they're doing, you think you've gotten through relatively unscathed. But the thinking of the house, the don't talk, don't trust, don't feel, don't need, that is, everybody gets that message on some level. And you got your needs met for attention from teachers and knowing how to do that. And I totally understand that. But what ends up happening is you either become a codependent, where you're so others focused, and that's how you're never present in your own skin and giving yourself any validation or self-worth, or you're going and you're becoming the addict who uses substances to check out and to feel better, or you're an overachiever like me and you go both ways, and you're the codependent and the addict, because nothing's ever good enough. And either, no matter what happens, though, you go through this process and you come off the alcohol and the drugs or whatever it is the behavior was that you were doing, and you do end up starting to have to re-look at some of the stuff that we didn't develop growing up that way. Whether we were using or we were, being a hero or whatever. And a lot of times you can tell when somebody goes into some sort of profession that is a helping, healing profession, that they had something go on in their childhood that made them want to help other people in some way, shape, or form not struggle or suffer the way that they did or they saw other people do. And so it's actually a quite positive byproduct of growing up in a dysfunctional environment. So thank you for sharing some more personal stuff about you.
Yeah,
so now that we know you're human.
Yeah, totally.
So now
Still
they've gone through
my own codependency.
right?
It's an ongoing
of course,
struggle.
but we heal it. We heal it because we were also involved, like with me with the meeting space in the recovery store and the other things that I'm involved in. It's like I'm attracted to these things, but they're constantly reminding me of, what it is I need to keep doing. I'm constantly learning, constantly growing, and I'm 51 years old.
Right.
And as long as I'm alive, I'll probably keep doing that, keep needing to learn and grow, because it makes me more empowered, and it also keeps me on the right path. It keeps me focused on the solution. And so after they're done, they've gone through the detox with you. I know you also have a rehabilitation. Yeah. So do they stay with you automatically, or is there, and you said that you have an outpatient as well?
Intensive outpatient.
So what qualifies whether or not a person stays with you, and what does that look like, and whether a person just goes and does intensive outpatient?
Sure. So just to back up and answer your other question about like why I ended up working with this population, they are some of the most resourceful, creative, and intelligent people I have ever met.
Yeah. Yes.
And I think that's part of the addiction, is like curiosity to want to explore different altered states of consciousness, because there is so much going on all the time.
Right.
And so I actually really enjoy working with this population. Part of it is definitely, stemming from my own upbringing, but I just kind of fell into it. My mentor here in the city, Dr. Tam Villar, taught me everything I know, and a lot of what the Nestled is based on is what I learned from her. I just kind of stuck with it.
Beautiful. Okay. And so Do they stay with you? Do they
Rehab.
not totally stay with you? Tell us.
Yeah, so we try to encourage everyone to commit to 30 days, which sounds like a long time, but there's programs out there that do 45, 90, 6 months.
Yeah.
I have found that they reach what we call a therapeutic maximum.
Yes.
Meaning they're like checked out and they want out, and they no longer feel like they're there voluntarily. They feel like they're being kept,
Right.
So we only say 30 days. We've had people stay, I think the max has been 45 or 50, somewhere in there. So they end up staying longer. So the real work starts, and I say the real work because we first have to take care of those basic needs and get them to a baseline. So we have to, detox them, make sure that they're sleeping, that their appetite is back, that they're hydrated. And so once those basic needs are met, then we can start working on the psychological aspects of addiction. And now we can start detoxing mentally, emotionally, spiritually, energetically. And so in the residential treatment is the technical term, but rehab is the one that's most commonly used. That's where we start to open up Pandora's box and break through walls of denial and avoidance, which runs very high with this population as well as their loved ones. And so what I mean by that is starting to address those elephants in the room of those traumas that happened usually early on in childhood is where all of this ends up stemming from.
Of course.
You said and their loved ones. So you guys are focused on like family therapy and that sort of stuff.
Heavily,
What if you don't have that? Like what if you don't have family that is willing to participate?
Yeah, that's not typically the case. Usually most people it'll sometimes be mostly the addict putting up a wall and a barrier and saying they don't have it, but we'll kind of keep digging and they'll start talking, and then you'll start to find, okay, where's that person? Where's your sister? Where's your, and we incorporate family very heavily. We have a monthly workshop. It's called interpersonal development. We have this both at the residential as well as the intensive outpatient program. Only intensive outpatients every Saturday. So it's more intense. We start incorporating family more there. But for residential, we have them come to the facility once a month, and they'll learn themselves about healthy communication skills and healthy boundaries, what is enabling. And then the next portion, they'll actually do experiential exercises. They'll break off under the guidance of a therapist, and they'll start addressing those elephants in the room. In addition to equine therapy, where we reunite the family with the addict, and it's less of the harder work and more of like family bonding and learning how to laugh together finally again, how to play again. And then we have a weekly family education class where we teach them the neuroscience behind addiction. Why can't they just stop? What happens to the body? Everything we've been talking about here, we teach the family members as well as
so
at least
important,
weekly therapy.
because oftentimes they just think, why can't you just stop?
Right.
If you loved me, you'd be able to stop. And they take it quite personally. They get super resentful, and they resent the person rather than the addiction. They don't see it as a medical condition. They don't see it as something that needs to be treated, and oftentimes that is something that also blocks a person from going and getting help. Like, let's say the person who is the addict has a big responsibility in the family, and they know that their spouse or a family member would not support them leaving and going and getting help because there's so much denial that's codependently supported in the family. And so it's sometimes the addict themselves that has to decide against what the family would think, that they need help. And of course, like you said, sometimes, the alcoholic or the addict thinks nobody knows, not affecting anybody, and that they've been hiding it super well until it just recently became a problem. And then they come through this whole process and they reunite with their family and they talk about it, and their family's like, we knew. We knew so much. We knew. We just didn't know what we could do about it. And so there we are. And honestly, there are, maybe you don't experience family situations where the family is not really super supportive of the person. But and I do though. I do feel like there's okay, so during COVID, when we opened as an essential business, the meeting space, what we ended up getting in that was a lot of people who could not go home, be home. Their family was all, like you were saying, full of addiction, or just very, very toxic, or they didn't have anybody, like Tay was saying, and they were alone with their head. And that was the place that they felt like they couldn't be, or they were homeless, and they had exhausted their family, their whole relationship with their family, and there was no more help. That well had run dry, right? And so for somebody to get to a place where that the family can start trusting the addict again, because the addict is now taking seriously a process that they're undergoing, where that process itself says, come family, let's help you guys understand how to not just rehabilitate this addict, but rehabilitate the family together.
And also now you have a professional saying, hey, this is the things that are going on, and not just the addict that's told you 1,000 times, I'm never going to do this again. I didn't really steal that. Now you have someone validating the treatment.
Yeah. It's really
teaching
important.
like concrete skills, like reflecting what you just heard someone say helps validate them and helps them feel heard. Reflecting feeling. They may not have said I was scared, but if you really listen and you look at their body language, you can tell that that's what they're reflecting feeling.
For sure.
And so, we teach them these like really practical, basic skills to learn how to interact with one another again in a healthy way, or maybe not again. Maybe this is the first time they've interacted in a healthy way.
Right.
Yeah. I think that the common thing, no matter what, whether you go to like 12-step recovery, or you go to a detox and rehab, and you go through that whole process, or you work one-on-one with a counselor and you start working, it's your attitude and the readiness that you have to do something different is the biggest factor in whether or not you make it, whether or not you change your life. And sometimes seeing how you've affected your family is very helpful in waking you up, because now that you're not medically lubricated by all your own drugs and alcohol or something, now your mind is open to being more honest with itself and seeing that maybe it wasn't just affecting you. So I'm really super happy. And sometimes you take people to meetings as well, right?
Yeah,
yes.
At the meeting space.
At the meeting space.
We'd like to expose them to in-person meetings as well as online meetings. So we expose them to a variety, not like any type of specific program. So that's our way of hoping that they'll find one program that works for them, and they'll continue down that road.
And I love that, because a lot of times we get people before and after they go through a detox and a rehab, where they go and they tell us they have a problem and they're shaking and they're scared and they can't hold their cup of coffee and whatever. And then they go and they get into some sort of rehab, but they've already maybe tasted the community, but they weren't physically, mentally ready for it. But when the treatment centers, when the rehabs are working with that as one of the options, and it's free and there's so many meetings, it helps even taking them to it and making it so, like, it's bridging the gap.
Right. Well, and the meeting space has more than just meetings for the addicts. They actually have meetings for the family. No, but for the family.
The codependents.
And so you have that, you've introduced the addict to this, and they're like, well, we have this, they have this too. Maybe you can come, And so, like, it gives you another avenue of continuing that treatment outside of inpatient.
And it is actually through the meeting space that I started meeting all the people that are running all the places.
Right.
Because I didn't have any personal experience with any of that part of it.
Although the primary reason they're coming to us is to safely and comfortably detox and for the psychotherapy aspect of treatment, we also offer a number of different ancillary services that make up our program. So we offer nutrition classes and juicing classes and cooking classes, yoga and meditation, breathing workshops 3 times a week, nature outings. So it's career counseling, financial wellness planning classes weekly. So in that way, it's a really well-rounded program that tries to instill lifelong healthy habits so that recovery isn't necessarily just white-knuckling sobriety, but more of like thriving and living a more meaningful, fulfilling life.
Wow, sounds amazing.
Yeah, and that's what's really the most important thing, is that a person needs to think that life after drugs and alcohol could be amazing. Otherwise, why would they do it? If I thought that stopping drugs and alcohol was going to make my life struggle and white knuckling and just living life very blah, I wouldn't have been motivated to walk through the initial hardest parts of getting through it. Because what would be the point? As far as I was concerned, my life sucked beforehand, and if it was going to suck afterwards, I didn't want to do it. And that's the argument that I had for a long time, is I just kept telling myself that. But luckily I was wrong. And I wish, like often people say, I could go back in time with a cute little time machine and go, can you please listen to me? Because you could have a life so much better than this if we could just take these steps and do this. And so thank you so much for joining us here.
My pleasure. Such an honor. Thank you.
This was such a
both.
treat. And I love that you shared so much about your experience yourself as well. So thank you for joining us today on The Real Recovery Show. We'd like to give a special thanks to our sponsor and gracious host, PHLV Radio here in Las Vegas. See you next week.